From DLA Piper, this is the Beyond the Curve podcast. In this episode, Texas Rangers General Counsel Erin Kearney is joined by DLA Piper's Hayley to discuss privacy and cybersecurity as they relate to both the famed baseball club and the overarching sports industry.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to DLA Piper's Beyond the Curve podcast. I'm Hayley Curry, a senior associate in the Data Protection, Privacy, and Security Group in DLA Piper's Dallas, Texas office. Today, we'll be talking about privacy and cybersecurity as they relate to the sports industry. And we are very lucky to have as our guest today, Erin Kearney, Senior Vice President and General Counsel of the Texas Rangers Baseball Club. Erin oversees all legal functions of the team and its development and entertainment-focused affiliates, with matters ranging from baseball to event production to real estate development. Erin also provides guidance and counsel on all matters pertaining to the club, whether it's corporate governance, negotiating contracts, or managing litigation matters. And Erin was previously part of the sports and entertainment group here at DLA Piper. Erin, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We are so excited to be talking with you today. From your bio, you obviously have a very full plate as GC of the Rangers, and I am amazed at the range of matters that you handle and advise on. And now, given the pace of privacy and cybersecurity developments over the last few years, I imagine it's becoming even fuller.
Yes, a little bit. It's definitely a lot more than I ever anticipated being able to handle in a given day.
Yes, and the sports industry is really an excellent case study for all things cyber and data today because it touches on nearly every issue. We've got data collection and connected devices, health privacy, advertising, and of course, cybersecurity and the ever-present threat of a cyber attack. So maybe just diving right in and starting with the connected devices point, we see connected devices, they seem to be everywhere today. Smartwatches, fitness trackers, embeds and shoes and clothing, all collecting various metrics and collecting data points. And I would love to know how the Rangers are using these and what the Rangers' approach is to this new way of gathering data.
I know that we do utilize a number of different baseball-specific technologies that have been created to monitor heart rate and just keep an eye out for injuries, particularly with pitchers, with the repetitiveness of them throwing that ball over and over and over again. And we use those technologies not only in practice, but MLB has also authorized those uses in games as well. Not actively during the game, of course, but they do collect and aggregate the data for the teams to analyze after the fact.
Are these sensors that they wear on their clothes or connected to their phones? I'm curious about the technology.
They definitely wear them. I don't think it's part of their clothing. I think they're pretty similar to that heart rate monitor we all tried to wear back in the 90s when it was the cool thing to wear to the gym. Probably just a bit more advanced than that.
Who owns the player's data that's connected to these devices?
Interestingly enough, it's not 100% written in stone clear, but I would be comfortable in saying that technically the players own it because I know the players can't be forced to wear these devices. They have to do it willingly. And the players can also require the club to destroy that data at any time. So I'm comfortable saying that while it doesn't expressly say that the player owns it, since they control it, I think that they essentially own it. And it goes with them. So any data that we have, if we trade the player to another team, that data goes with them. We don't retain it.
I'm not surprised to hear that it might not be clear, like so many things in privacy today. Not clear is what we say all the time. In the sports context in particular, there may be additional methods of collecting data, whether by blood draws or urinalyses, biometric scans, as well as specialized performance medical care. How does the team handle health privacy concerns related to these?
We treat any of that data as if they were medical records that are covered by HIPAA. It is kept highly segregated from the rest of our data. Even as GC, I can't go digging into anybody's files and try to find it. And it is not released to anybody unless expressly requested by the player.
When we go to most websites today, we'll see plenty of cookies and online trackers popping up, all hoping to use our data to target us with advertising. And even offline, when we go to something like a sporting event, we're similarly generating data that could be very valuable in a marketing context. How does the team balance protecting fans' privacy with using their information for things like advertising?
This is a theme that's going to probably keep popping up in this discussion we're having, but we're very lucky that MLB has a really big hand in a lot of this. And I don't know if I would say it takes control, but leads the way in it. So whenever you go on our website, it's actually MLB that is collecting data and your permission to use it or not use it. It's MLB that governs the privacy policies that we have, usage terms and conditions. But what then they do for us is they also, on the flip side, handle our marketing communications, for example, to people who have signed up to receive a certain number of emails or text messages or whatever form of marketing they've agreed to from Major League Baseball and the Texas Rangers. And then they also aggregate this data for us and anonymize it and provide us with data streams that we then have an entire data analytics department that analyzes it and sees how we can better target our marketing and our messages that we're trying to get out to our fans.
Would you mind talking a little bit more about how the team and MLB interact? It's very interesting that they have such a big hand in the privacy sphere and the marketing. We'd just love to know a little bit more about that.
We're really lucky from what I've learned in the last couple of years as I've met other counsel for other local sports teams here in the Dallas area. We're super lucky that they do give us guidance because anybody that looks me up knows that I come from a real estate background. So privacy to me has been one huge learning curve. And at least with their guidance, it helps me know I'm not missing something. So MLB manages our online platform for us and puts our content out there at our request. But then what they do on the backside for the legal teams when we're dealing with personal data that might not be involved with the internet, for example. So back to players' data or even employees' data, they do provide us guidance and have put together a rather comprehensive data processing addendum that we rely fairly heavily on for resources and information when negotiating with vendors on topics that I might not necessarily be an expert in.
I was actually just going to ask about if they had a template data processing addendum.
They do. And from what I understand from the negotiations I have had, it's extremely comprehensive and hard to comply with. So I've learned a bit over the years as vendors request changes here and there, and I have to go to MLB and just learn more about what all of these super technical terms mean so that I can figure out where I can give and where I can't and still protect the privacy of our fans, players, employees, and anybody's data we have.
Absolutely. Do vendors often push back on the DPA terms and try to negotiate them?
Yes and no. My first couple of years here, I think there was a lot more pushback at that point than there is now. In recent years, some of the technology that we've negotiated, the vendors just expect it at this point. And they're like, okay, we know how to address these concerns that we're raising.
Yes, and I'm sure the Rangers aren't the only ones requesting these DPAs to be signed.
You know, there's at least 29 other baseball clubs that are.
Exactly. Well, as you know, Texas recently joined a dozen or so other states in enacting its own comprehensive state privacy law that will impact organizations like the Rangers or other sports teams. How are you planning for that law to take effect in July?
Except for actually reading it and learning about what it says, I actually don't believe that law is going to require a whole lot of changes on our part, given that our fans come from basically across the world at this point, and they come to games. Our fans are not only located in Texas. So for years now, I mean, we've already made sure we comply with the CCPA, which is infinitely more restrictive than Texas's law anyway. So I think we'll be fine.
Yes, that is what we are finding. Many clients have already done so much for California and the other states.
Yes.
So let's switch gears to cybersecurity for a little bit. There was a 2020 study out of the UK that found 70% of sports organizations experience at least one cyber attack per year. This is versus 32% for other businesses. And sports teams are, of course, very visible, familiar organizations, and hackers likely associate big names with big budgets and potential publicity. And over the last few years, we've seen a significant increase in cyber attacks and data breaches generally, and ransomware attacks in particular. And a live sporting event, as you could imagine, would be quite a target for these threat actors. If they could successfully shut down a game, the pressure to pay a ransom could be huge. How do the Rangers approach cybersecurity? What is top of mind for you when you're thinking about these cyber threats?
Well, first and foremost is these bad actors are probably out of luck because there's no high budget when it all goes to the players. You have to play these superstar players in order to have a team. We have in probably the last year and a half have taken a very proactive approach to cybersecurity, which at first I admittedly rolled my eyes at and didn't want to be a part of it. And our CFO coined the term that we were voluntold that we were on the cybersecurity committee. But as I've learned more about the threats that are out there and the approaches and the thought process that goes into trying to prevent them from happening again or prevent them from happening in the first place, I've realized the importance of what we're doing in these monthly meetings. And we sit every month and we look at incidences that have been recorded, figure out whether they were real or not, figure out are they related to any other incidents that have happened recently. And it's been really very eye-opening. And I think from what I've learned in recent months as well, that we're ahead of the curve, which is awesome. I say that lightly because if there's an incident, I'm sure we're no longer ahead of the curve, but we like to pretend we're not going to have one.
Those kinds of meetings are so important, and the data sharing, the information sharing to stay ahead of these threats is so important. So it's great that you all are doing that.
Yeah, it really is. And I recently went to an all-day CLE that really addressed crises and what can happen. And a big portion of that, in my mind, having been in New York City on 9/11, I went into this thinking, oh, mass casualty crisis. But a good portion of the day was actually focused on cybersecurity as a super huge risk for crises and a risk where one little thing might go unnoticed if you're not talking about it.
Absolutely. It is such a risk. Shutting down a sporting event is obviously one concern. It's a data resiliency issue too. If you can't access the data the team relies on, well, that's a huge problem as well. So it's multifaceted as a threat.
Well, and as I've learned, it goes even further than the data. I mean, it's like you shut down the event, that can have so many different connotations and ways that can happen. A couple years ago, we had a day where the MLB app went down and nobody could get into any ballpark in the United States for a game. And it's like, wow, that's a serious problem. Thankfully, in that case, it was not a cybersecurity breach, at least to my knowledge. They did not tell us that it was. But it can be something as simple as that. It can be something where they hack into the computers and we can't get data to and from New York City and MLB reviewing the game. I mean, it could be the lights, the heat. It could be really anything.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And on the topic of data, sports teams really do make great targets for their very sensitive, very valuable data, player health records, scouting reports. These could be particularly enticing to opponents or gamblers looking for leverage. What is the team's approach to protecting this data generally? Would love to hear your thoughts.
In some ways, technology has been really good for this. Obviously, it increases the risk of cyber attacks or somebody trying to get in that way. But on the flip side, there's no more paper records. So one of the big projects that I worked on when I first started was literally going through boxes and boxes of old scouting reports, making sure there were no super important names that we needed to keep, and then shredding the rest of them. And it's great now that using technology, we're able to, one, have everything electronically, but we can also, as an organization, segregate different parts of our network from others. So a lot of the data lies, at least the players' data lies in a segregated room, for lack of a better term for untechnological individuals like myself, where there's only select individuals that can access it.
That permissioning is so important to limit the data to the people who actually need it to perform their jobs.
Yeah, and it's actually cool because that same concept applies to protecting all of our data, so all of our documents that aren't necessarily player-protected data from whatever's going on in the ballpark as well. So when we have people in the ballpark for a game, or we have vendors in the ballpark, like right now they're setting up for the rodeo, things like that, they're actually on a segregated network and they can't get to our internal network here. So they can't have access to anything that's going on in the front office.
So much of our discussion has been about the many risks associated with these new technologies. But on a more positive note, what types of these new technologies are you most excited about?
Well, I think if we haven't already established that I am not a technology lover, I'll just put that out there. But it's funny because the one that I'm most excited about actually has absolutely nothing to do with most of what we talked about today. And when I started here, I rolled my eyes incessantly at the then General Counsel every time she started talking about our automated contracting platform. And I'm like, this is the dumbest idea ever. Why can't we just create our own contracts? And within the last year or so, we had to make a change to a new vendor because the one we were previously using couldn't make the calculations that we needed done in these various contracts. And I've realized the value of platforms like this, mainly because during the transition, we had to pump a lot of those contracts out ourselves in the legal department, and it's just a lot of volume. So at this point, I am most excited about any technology that takes some of this paper off of my desk.
Absolutely. Cannot argue with that. Has MLB taken any position regarding AI or machine learning? Is that anything you guys are using yet?
Not yet. They've been radio silent on it, and I am a little old school, so admittedly a little hesitant to even delve into that realm, but I would be lying if it wasn't on my to-do list of things to look into once we start the season, because this is our busiest time here in the front office, or at least in the legal department. So once we start the season, I definitely want to delve into it, particularly after speaking with and hearing from other GCs in the area that have been contemplating this in their worlds.
Well, on that note, we do know how busy you are, and we so appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Erin.
Thank you. I'm very thankful to be here.
Thank you for listening to DLA Piper's Beyond the Curve podcast. All information, content, and materials contained in this podcast are for general informational purposes only. This podcast is intended to be a general overview of the subjects discussed and does not create a lawyer-client relationship. Statements and opinions are those of the individual speakers and participants and do not necessarily reflect the policies or opinions of DLA Piper LLP US. The information contained in this podcast is not and should not be used as a substitute for legal advice. No listener should act or refrain from acting with respect to any particular legal matter on the basis of this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel in the relevant jurisdiction. This podcast may qualify as lawyer advertising, requiring notice in some jurisdictions. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. DLA Piper LLP US accepts no responsibility for any actions taken or not taken as a result of this podcast.